The phone slipped from my trembling fingers and crashed onto the marble floor of the bridal suite, the screen shattering into a spider web of cracks that somehow perfectly mirrored the state of my heart. 20 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, and my mother's text message was still burning behind my eyelids like acid. "Sorry, darling, your sister's café opening is today too, and you know how important this business venture is for the family. We'll make it up to you." Make it up to me. Those 4 words that had haunted me through 2 lifetimes. You see, I'm living my second life, and if that sounds impossible, well, so did dying alone in a hospital bed at 28 while my family celebrated my golden child. Sister's latest achievement 3 floors below. But here's the thing about getting a second chance. Sometimes it comes with the cruel realization that some people will never change, no matter how many opportunities you give them. My name is Amelia Chen, and 5 years ago, I died. Not the dramatic, movie-worthy death you might imagine, but a pathetic, lonely end in a sterile hospital room where the antiseptic smell burned my nostrils, and the beeping machines counted down my final moments like a twisted lullaby. Cancer had eaten through my body like fire through paper, starting with a small lump I'd ignored because I was too busy trying to earn my family's love to care for myself. The irony still cuts deep. I spent my entire first life being the perfect daughter, the one who never caused trouble, never demanded attention, never complained when they missed my graduations, my birthdays, my desperate attempts to make them proud. I was 28 years old and had achieved everything they claimed to want for me. A stable job as a marketing director, a modest apartment in a good neighbourhood, even a savings account that would have made my penny-pinching father proud. But achievements mean nothing when you're taking your last breath alone. I remember everything about that final day with crystal clarity. The way the afternoon sun slanted through the hospital blinds, painting geometric patterns on my white sheets. The sound of laughter echoing from the hospital lobby where my family was probably taking photos at Sophia's art gallery opening. My sister, the golden child, the creative genius who could do no wrong in their eyes, had chosen that exact day to launch her biggest exhibition yet. "Family emergency," I'd whispered to the nurse when she asked why no one had come to visit. Even dying, I was still protecting their image, still making excuses for their absence. The nurse, a kind woman named Maria with gentle hands and tired eyes, had held my hand as my breathing grew shallow. "You deserved better, mija," she'd whispered as my vision blurred. "You deserved so much better." Those were the last words I heard before the darkness took me. But fate, it seems, has a twisted sense of humour. I woke up 5 years in the past, gasping like I'd been drowning, in my 23-year-old body with every painful memory intact and a heart full of rage that burned brighter than a supernova. The date on my phone read exactly 5 years before my death, the day I'd gotten my first real job, the day I'd called my parents with excitement only to be told they were too busy with Sophia's college graduation party to celebrate with me. The déjà vu was suffocating. At first, I thought I could change things. Armed with knowledge of the future and a desperate hope that maybe this time would be different, I threw myself into being the perfect daughter with renewed vigour. I remembered every important date, anticipated their needs, showered them with attention and gifts I couldn't afford. I bit my tongue when they compared me to Sophia, smiled when they forgot my achievements, and pretended my heart wasn't breaking every time they chose her over me. For 5 years, I played the same game with different strategies, hoping for different results. God, I was such a fool, standing there in my white wedding dress, a dress I'd spent 3 months choosing, hoping my mother would come shopping with me like she did with Sophia, for everything from prom dresses to apartment hunting. I felt the familiar sting of being eternally second choice, the same pattern repeating like a broken record stuck on the most painful song ever written. The wedding dress itself was a masterpiece of delicate lace and flowing silk, with hand-sewn pearls that caught the light like tears. I'd maxed out 2 credit cards to afford it because, in my foolish heart, I believed that maybe if I looked perfect enough, if the wedding was grand enough, they wouldn't be able to resist showing up. The venue alone had cost me 6 months of salary St. Catherine's Cathedral, with its soaring Gothic arches and stained glass windows that painted rainbows across the marble floors. But those first 3 rows, the ones I'd reserved with ivory ribbons and tiny calligraphy cards that read, "Reserved for family," empty as a graveyard at midnight, through the ornate window of the bridal suite, I could see the church packed with people, business associates who'd come for networking opportunities, college friends who'd driven in from 3 states away, distant relatives who'd shown up for the open bar and free dinner. The irony was suffocating. Strangers and acquaintances had rearranged their schedules to celebrate my happiness, but my own blood family couldn't be bothered to choose me over a cafe opening. My fiancé, David Rodriguez, a perfectly adequate man with perfectly adequate dreams and a perfectly predictable future, was probably standing at the altar checking his Rolex, his face growing redder by the minute as whispers rippled through the congregation. David was safe, reliable, the kind of man who balanced his checkbook every month, never forgot to take his vitamins, and whose idea of adventure was trying a new restaurant that had been featured in the local newspaper. In my previous life, I'd settled for safe because I thought that's all I deserved. David represented stability, normalcy, the kind of quiet life where I could fade into the background and never risk the pain of reaching for something extraordinary, only to have it slip through my fingers. But this time, I knew something David didn't. I knew that in 6 months, his stable accounting firm would crumble when his partner Thomas embezzled half their clients' money to fund his gambling addiction. I knew that David would blame me for not bringing enough family connections to save his sinking business. I knew that exactly 2 years and 3 months from today, he'd leave me for his secretary Rachel, a cliché so pathetic it would have been funny if it weren't going to be my life. Again. The wedding planner knocked softly on the door, her voice carefully modulated to professional calm, despite the obvious disaster unfolding. "Miss Chen? The guests are getting quite restless, and the organist is asking if we need to play another round of processional music. Are we ready to begin?" I stared at my reflection in the antique mirror that had probably witnessed 100 other brides on their special days. The woman looking back at me wore a designer gown and professional makeup that had taken 2 hours to perfect, but all I could see was the girl who died alone, forgotten, unloved. The same girl who was about to repeat every mistake because she was too afraid to reach for something better. The church doors felt like they were calling to me, but my feet might as well have been encased in concrete. Every step toward that altar would be a step toward the same ending, just with different details. The same pattern of settling, of accepting scraps of affection, of being grateful for the bare minimum, because I'd convinced myself I wasn't worth more. That's when my phone rang, not the shattered one lying in pieces on the floor. This was my backup phone, the emergency line that only 3 people had the number to. My heart leaped with desperate hope, thinking maybe my father had realised his mistake, maybe he was calling to say they were racing over, that Sophia's café could wait, that I was finally going to be chosen first. But the name glowing on the screen made my blood freeze and my heart race simultaneously. Alexander Cross, Alexander Cross. The name that made stock markets tremble and CEOs lose sleep. The billionaire whose empire spanned 3 continents and whose net worth was discussed in hushed, reverent tones in boardrooms across the world. The man who owned half the city's skyline. And, if I was being honest with myself, the other half of my thoughts since we'd first met 2 months ago at the Winterbourne charity auction. Our first encounter had been like something out of a fever dream. I'd been there representing my marketing firm's pro bono work, wearing a borrowed dress and feeling completely out of place among the city's elite. Then, this man, this devastatingly handsome, impossibly powerful man, had appeared beside me as if materializing from my deepest fantasies. steel grey eyes that seemed to see straight through every mask I wore, a jawline that could cut glass, and presence so commanding that conversation stopped when he entered a room. He'd bid $2 million on a painting that was worth maybe $50,000, just to have an excuse to talk to me. $2 million. I'd nearly choked on my champagne when the auctioneer's gavel fell. Expensive conversation starter, I'd managed to say, and his laugh. God, his laugh was like dark chocolate and aged whiskey, smooth and intoxicating and completely addictive. Worth every penny if it got your attention. He'd replied, those grey eyes holding mine like he was memorising every detail of my face. I'm Alexander Cross. As if anyone in that room didn't know exactly who he was. Our second meeting had been even more surreal. Last week, he'd appeared at my office building like some beautiful, expensive apparition in a $1,000 suit, carrying coffee from the artisanal place downtown that charged $20 for a latte. He'd somehow learned that I worked late every Thursday, somehow known that I preferred oat milk to regular, somehow managed to show up at the exact moment I was leaving the building with my arms full of client presentations and my hair falling out of its professional bun. You look like you could use a coffee break, he'd said, and I'd nearly dropped everything I was carrying because Alexander freaking Cross was standing on the sidewalk outside my mediocre office building with coffee and that smile that made my knees forget how to function properly. Both times he'd looked at me like I was the only person in the room worth seeing. Both times his attention had felt like standing in direct sunlight after years of living in shadows. And both times I'd run away like Cinderella fleeing the ball. Because women like me, ordinary women with ordinary lives and extraordinary baggage, don't end up with men like him. But here he was, calling me on my wedding day. My hand shook as I swiped to answer, nearly dropping the phone in my nervousness. Hello? Amelia? His voice was exactly as I remembered, like dark velvet and midnight storms, the kind of voice that could seduce secrets from stone. Are you really going through with this? The question hit me like a physical blow, stealing the breath from my lungs. What? This wedding, this safe, predictable life you're about to chain yourself to like an anchor around your neck. Are you really going to stand there in that church and pretend it's what you want? I sank onto the velvet chair in the corner of the bridal suite, my designer dress pooling around me like spilled moonlight. Through the wall, I could hear the organ playing the same processional song for the third time, the notes growing more strained with each repetition. How did you even... I started, but he cut me off. Know about your wedding? Darling, when someone as extraordinary as you is about to make the biggest mistake of her life, word travels fast in certain circles. There was a pause, and I could hear the sound of a powerful car engine, wind rushing past what sounded like an open window. Your family isn't there, are they? The words hit like a slap across my face, the truth of them more painful than any physical blow. How could you possibly... Because I know them. I know your type of family, Amelia. The kind that only sees you when you're useful, only loves you when it's convenient. The kind that will always choose someone else over you, no matter how much you bleed for them, no matter how much of yourself you sacrifice on the altar of their approval. Tears burned behind my carefully applied makeup because he was right. So devastatingly, painfully, completely right that it hurt to breathe. In 2 sentences, this man had summarized the entire tragedy of my existence, both lives of it. I'm outside your church, he said, and my heart stopped beating entirely. I have a proposition for you. Alexander, I can't, I whispered, but the words caught in my throat like thorns. You died once before, didn't you? The world tilted on its axis. The phone nearly slipped from my nerveless fingers as shockwaves crashed through my system. The carefully climate-controlled air in the bridal suite suddenly felt thin, insufficient. like trying to breathe on top of a mountain. "What did you just say?" I breathed, my voice barely audible even to myself. "You heard me perfectly. You died, broken and alone, betrayed by everyone who should have loved you and protected you. And somehow, impossibly, miraculously, you're here again, living a second chance that most people would kill for. And you're about to waste it on the same people who destroyed you the first time." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was impossible. No one knew about my rebirth. No one could know. I'd been so careful, so paranoid about keeping that secret buried deep where no one could ever find it. I'd rehearsed cover stories for every inconsistency, explained away my knowledge of future events as lucky guesses or intuition. How? The word came out as barely more than a whisper, a prayer to a universe that had already proven it delighted in impossible things. His laugh was soft and dangerous, like silk hiding a blade. "Let's just say that some of us are more than we seem, darling. The real question, the only question that matters, is this. Are you going to waste this miraculous second chance on a man who will never deserve you and a family who will never choose you? Or are you finally going to choose yourself?" Through the stained glass window, I could see David pacing at the altar like a caged animal, checking his phone every 30 seconds. The wedding planner was hovering near the sanctuary doors, probably wondering if she was about to witness the most expensive runaway bride incident of her career. The guests were starting to murmur more loudly, some of them pulling out their own phones to capture what was clearly becoming a social media moment. "What are you proposing?" I asked, though part of me, the part that had learned to recognize fate when it came knocking, already knew the answer would change everything. "Marry me instead." The words hung in the air like incense, impossible and intoxicating and absolutely, completely insane. "You're out of your mind," I breathed, but even as I said it, something wild and desperate was unfurling in my chest like wings. Maybe I am, but I'm also the only person in your life who's never made you feel like a consolation prize. I'm the only one who sees your worth without you having to prove it, who chooses you without you having to earn it. And unlike your family, unlike that man waiting for you at the altar, like he's doing you some kind of favour, I'm here. Right now, in this moment when it matters most, I'm choosing you first. My reflection stared back at me from the antique mirror. A woman in white silk and lace caught between two worlds, two choices, two completely different futures, stretching out like roads diverging in a wood. In my previous life, I played it safe, settled for scraps, accepted the crumbs of love my family threw my way until there was nothing left of me to give. But this time, I had the power to rewrite everything. "The church doors," I whispered, my heart hammering against my ribs, like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "Are you really?" "I'm walking through them right now." And that's when I heard it. The sound that would change everything. The massive oak doors of St. Catherine's Cathedral creaking open with a sound like thunder rolling across the heavens, followed by the sharp, collective intake of breath from 300 guests as a figure stepped into the golden light, streaming through the doorway. My second chance was walking down the aisle, and this time he was walking towards me, not away. The silence that followed was deafening. 300 guests turned as one, their necks craning like sunflowers following the sun, and suddenly the cathedral felt electric with tension. I pressed my face against the bridal suite window, my breath fogging the glass as I watched Alexander Cross stride down the centre aisle with the confidence of a man who owned the world, and maybe he did. He was magnificent, devastating, absolutely lethal in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's annual salary, every step calculated and precise like a predator closing in on its prey. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows seemed to bend around him, painting him in jeweled colours that made him look like some dark angel come to collect souls. The congregation parted before him like the Red Sea, whispers erupting in his wake. I caught fragments of conversation drifting up from below. Is that Alexander Cross? What's he doing here? Oh my God, do you think he's here for the bride? David stood frozen at the altar, his face cycling through confusion, terror, and something that might have been relief. Because, let's be honest, who argues with a man who could buy and sell your entire bloodline before lunch? But I barely registered David's reaction because Alexander's eyes had found mine through the window. Even from this distance, even through glass and 30 feet of space, the intensity of his gaze hit me like a physical force. Those storm grey eyes held a promise, a challenge, and something else. Something that looked suspiciously like salvation. My phone buzzed with another call from him. Are you watching? His voice was silk and sin, amusement threading through every word. The entire city's watching, I managed, my voice barely steady. Alexander, you can't just... Can't what? Make a grand gesture, crash a wedding, steal the bride? His laugh was rich and dark. Darling, I'm Alexander Cross. I can do whatever I want. Down in the sanctuary, he'd reached the altar. David stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet as Alexander approached. The poor man looked like he was about to faint, which, honestly, was probably the most interesting thing he'd done all year. Besides, Alexander continued, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that made my skin prickle with awareness. You haven't said no. He was right. God help me, he was absolutely right. This is insane, I whispered, but even as I said it, I was reaching for the door handle of the bridal suite. People will talk. The scandal will be... Let them talk. Let them whisper and speculate and write their little gossip columns. Do you know what they'll really be saying? They'll be saying that Alexander Cross chose you. That out of all the women in the world, supermodels, heiresses, actresses, I choose you. The words hit me like lightning, illuminating truths I'd been too afraid to examine. In my previous life, I'd been so concerned with avoiding scandal, with keeping my head down and not making waves. I'd lived in the shadows, accepting invisibility as the price of peace. But what had that gotten me? A lonely death and a family who couldn't even be bothered to hold my hand as I slipped away. Your move, Amelia, Alexander said softly. Door number 1. Walk down that aisle to a man who sees you as a consolation prize. Live a life that's already been written. Repeat every mistake that led to your death. Or, door number 2, take my hand and rewrite your entire story. Through the window, I watched him pull something from his jacket pocket. Even from this distance, I could see the flash of diamonds, the glint of platinum, a ring box, an actual ring box, like he'd been planning this moment for longer than the 20 minutes since he'd called. You came prepared, I said, my voice catching somewhere between laughter and tears. I've been prepared since the moment I met you. The question is, are you ready to stop being a victim of your own story and start being the author? The truth hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just about choosing between two men. This was about choosing between two versions of myself, the woman who accepted scraps and the woman who demanded the whole feast. The woman who died, forgotten, and the woman who could live unforgettably. I thought about my family, probably at this very moment cutting the ribbon on Sophia's café, taking selfies and posting them to social media with captions about family support and proud moments. They'd check their phones later, see the missed calls from the wedding planner, and feel what? Guilt? Regret? Or would they just make excuses and promise to make it up to me with dinner next week that they'd inevitably cancel? In my previous life, I would have forgiven them. I would have smiled and pretended it didn't matter. would have taken whatever scraps of attention they offered and been grateful for them. But I was done being grateful for scraps. If I do this, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word, if I walk away from this wedding, there's no going back. My family will never forgive me for the embarrassment. Your family, Alexander said, and there was steel in his voice now, forfeited the right to your consideration the moment they chose not to show up. You don't owe loyalty to people who've never been loyal to you. He was right. God, he was so right, it hurt. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The bride my family couldn't be bothered to see, the daughter they'd forgotten about on her most important day. The woman who'd spent 2 lifetimes trying to earn love that would never come. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, though my heart was already racing toward the answer. Marry me, right here, right now, in front of all of these people. Give them a show they'll never forget. Let the world see that Amelia Chen doesn't settle for being second choice. She becomes the first choice of the most powerful man in the city. The audacity of it took my breath away. You're talking about a real marriage, not some elaborate prank or business arrangement. I'm talking about choosing each other. I'm talking about you finally getting the wedding you deserve with someone who moved heaven and earth to be here. I'm talking about walking into a future that belongs to us, not to people who never valued what they had. My hands were shaking as I reached for the door handle. This was it, the moment that would define everything that came after. In my previous life, I'd been a passive participant in my own story, letting things happen to me instead of making them happen. But this time I was going to choose. Alexander, I said, my voice clear and strong for the first time in years, ask me properly. The silence stretched between us, electric and full of possibility. Then I heard the rustle of fabric, the soft sound of footsteps, and suddenly Alexander Cross was outside the bridal suite door. Amelia Chen, he said, his voice carrying through the wood like a prayer. Will you marry me? I opened the door. He stood there in the hallway, impossibly tall and devastating, holding a ring box that caught the light like captured starfire. His grey eyes were intense, focused, like I was the only thing in the universe worth looking at. Yes, I said, and the word felt like freedom. The ring slid onto my finger like it belonged there, like it had been waiting my entire life to find its home. 3 carats of perfect diamond, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes. It was stunning, outrageous, completely over the top, everything I'd never dared to dream I deserved. How did you know my size? I asked, staring at the perfect fit. His smile was pure sin. I know everything about you, Amelia. Your ring size, your coffee order, the way you bite your lip when you're nervous. I know you deserve better than what you've been settling for. Hand in hand, we walked toward the sanctuary doors. I could hear the chaos erupting below. Shocked gasps, excited whispers, the furious clicking of camera phones. The wedding planner appeared at the top of the stairs, her face cycling through professional composure, confusion, and barely contained panic. Miss Chen, I don't understand what's happening, but we have 300 guests waiting and... They're about to witness the wedding of the century, Alexander said smoothly, never breaking stride. I trust you can adapt. The woman's eyes went wide as she took in the ring on my finger, the way Alexander's hand held mine like he'd never let go. The absolute certainty in both our faces. Yes, sir. Of course, sir. Right away, sir. As we descended the stairs toward the sanctuary, I felt something shift inside me. The woman who'd died alone and forgotten was gone. The woman who'd spent 5 years begging for crumbs of love was disappearing with each step. In her place was someone new. Someone who'd been chosen first, loved fiercely, claimed completely by a man who could have had anyone in the world. The sanctuary doors opened and 300 faces turned toward us. Cameras flashed like lightning. Whispers erupted into excited chatter. And there, at the altar, David stood with his mouth hanging open like a fish gasping for air. But I barely saw any of it because Alexander was beside me, his presence like a shield against every doubt, every fear, every voice that had ever told me I wasn't worth choosing. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low and warm. I looked out at the congregation, at the sea of shocked faces and raised phones, at the empty seats where my family should have been. But for the first time in 2 lifetimes, their absence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. "Let's give them something to talk about," I said, and together we walked toward the altar where my real life was about to begin. The moment we stepped into the sanctuary, the energy shifted like a storm front moving in. 300 guests rose to their feet in a wave of rustling silk and gasped breaths, their faces a kaleidoscope of shock, excitement, and barely contained glee. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. This was the social event of the decade unfolding in real time. Father Mackenzie, the elderly priest who'd been scheduled to marry David and me, stood at the altar with his mouth agape, clutching his prayer book like a lifeline. His eyes darted between David, who looked like he was about to hyperventilate, and Alexander, who radiated the kind of confidence that came with owning half the world's economy. "Father," Alexander said smoothly as we approached, his voice carrying easily through the cathedral's acoustics, "I believe there's been a change of groom." The priest blinked rapidly, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "Mr. Cross, I don't have the legal documentation for... This is highly irregular." Alexander reached into his jacket with his free hand and produced what looked like a marriage license, already filled out and notarized. "Everything you need is right here. Completely legal, completely binding." My jaw dropped. "How did you..." "I told you, darling. I've been prepared for this moment since we met." His grey eyes sparkled with mischief and something deeper, something that looked like destiny. "I may have pulled a few strings at City Hall this morning." The audacity was breathtaking. This man had orchestrated an entire backup wedding in the space of a few hours, as if he'd known exactly how this day would unfold, as if he'd been waiting for me to finally choose myself. David finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. "Amelia, what is this? What's happening?" I turned to face my former fiancé, this man I'd been about to settle for, and felt nothing but pity. In my previous life, I would have apologized, would have tried to spare his feelings, would have made myself smaller to avoid conflict. But that woman was dead and buried. "David," I said, my voice clear and strong, "I'm choosing better." The words echoed through the cathedral like a gunshot. Cameras flashed in rapid succession as society reporters captured every moment. Someone in the back was live streaming on Instagram. I could see the phone held high above the crowd. David's face cycled through hurt, anger, and finally resignation. This is humiliating, Amelia. People will never forget this." "Good," I said simply. "Let them remember the day I stopped accepting less than I deserved." Alexander squeezed my hand, a gesture of support that sent warmth racing up my arm. "I believe the lady has made her choice clear," he said to David, his tone polite but carrying an undertone of steel. "I am sure you'll find happiness elsewhere." What happened next was pure theatre. David, faced with the most powerful man in the city and a bride who'd clearly moved on, did the only thing he could do. He walked away. The crowd parted before him like he was carrying a contagious disease, whispers following in his wake. Part of me felt sorry for him. But a larger part, the part that had learned hard lessons about self-worth, felt liberated. Father Mackenzie cleared his throat nervously. Well, if everything is in order, legally, shall we proceed? Please, Alexander said, and suddenly we were standing at the altar where I'd planned to make the biggest mistake of my second life. The ceremony was surreal, like watching someone else's life unfold in fast forward. Father Mackenzie, clearly flustered but determined to maintain some semblance of normalcy, began the traditional vows. The congregation had settled into rapt attention, phones recording every second of what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about wedding of the year. Do you, Alexander Cross, take Amelia Chen to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Alexander said, his voice unwavering, his eyes never leaving mine. I choose her above all others, in this life and whatever comes after. The phrasing was unusual, but it sent shivers down my spine. Whatever comes after, like he knew about death and rebirth, about second chances and the weight of forever. And do you, Amelia Chen, take Alexander Cross to be your lawfully wedded husband? I looked into those storm-grey eyes and saw my future stretching out like an uncharted ocean. No more settling, no more being second choice, no more dying alone and forgotten. I do, I said, and meant it with every fibre of my being. I choose freedom. The kiss that sealed our marriage was soft at first, almost tentative before deepening into something that felt like a promise. The congregation erupted into applause and cheers, the sound echoing off the cathedral's vaulted ceiling like thunder. We were married. Actually, legally, completely married. Mrs. Amelia Cross. The name sent electricity racing through my veins. But the real shock came 20 minutes later, as we were signing the marriage certificate in the vestry. My phone, which I'd forgotten in my clutch, began buzzing incessantly. Text after text, call after call, the notifications piling up like an avalanche. Alexander noticed my expression as I scrolled through them. Your family? I nodded, unable to speak as I read message after message of increasingly frantic confusion. Mum. Darling, we just saw something on social media about your wedding. There are pictures of you with Alexander Cross. This must be some mistake. Dad. Amelia, call me immediately. What is this nonsense about you marrying someone else? We need to discuss this situation right now. Sophia. OMGM, what did you do? Everyone's sharing videos of you marrying Alexander Cross. This is so embarrassing for the family. How could you be so selfish? The texts kept coming, each one more desperate than the last as the reality of what they'd missed sank in. But it was my mother's final message that made me laugh out loud. We're coming to the reception right now. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Don't do anything else until we get there. Alexander read over my shoulder, his expression growing darker with each message. Fascinating. They couldn't be bothered to attend your wedding, but the moment it becomes newsworthy, suddenly they're available. They think they can control this, I said, amazement colouring my voice. They actually think they can show up now and somehow manage the situation. And what do you want to do about that? The question hung in the air between us, heavy with possibility. In my previous life, I would have apologised, would have tried to smooth things over, would have spent years making up for this embarrassment I had caused. But looking at my new husband, my brilliant, powerful, impossibly gorgeous husband who'd literally rewritten the rules of reality to choose me, I felt something I'd never experienced before. Power. I want to give them exactly what they deserve, I said slowly, the plan forming in my mind like dawn breaking over the horizon. I want them to see what they lost when they chose a café opening over their daughter's wedding. Alexander's smile was sharp as a blade. I was hoping you'd say that. I have already made some calls. What kind of calls? The kind that ensure your wedding to the most eligible bachelor in the country, becomes front-page news in every society magazine, newspaper, and gossip blog in the city. The kind that turn this into the most talked-about social event of the year, the kind that makes sure everyone knows exactly who wasn't important enough to attend. My breath caught. You're going to destroy them socially. I'm going to let their own choices destroy them. There's a difference. His grey eyes glittered with calculated malice. By tomorrow morning, every person in their social circle will know that the Chen family missed their daughter's wedding to Alexander Cross for a cafe opening. Their friends, their business associates, their country club members, everyone will be talking. The beautiful cruelty of it took my breath away. Not violence, not illegal schemes, but simply letting the truth speak for itself. They had chosen poorly, and now the whole world would know it. The society photographers are already calling this the wedding of the decade, Alexander continued. Vogue wants an exclusive interview. The Times is running a feature story. Your wedding photos will be in magazines across the country. I thought about Sophia's cafe opening, probably winding down right about now with a few dozen guests and some modest local press coverage. Meanwhile, my wedding was becoming international news. There's more, Alexander said, pulling out his phone. I bought the building your sister's cafe is in this morning. My mouth fell open. You what? Commercial real estate is a hobby of mine. Turns out, the landlord was very motivated to sell. When I made him an offer, he couldn't refuse. His smile was pure predator. I'm thinking of doubling the rent. Market rates, you understand. The ruthlessness was breathtaking. Within hours of our marriage, Alexander was already moving chess pieces I couldn't even see, protecting me and punishing those who'd hurt me with surgical precision. You bought a building to spite my family. I bought a building to teach them that actions have consequences, that choosing a cafe opening over your wedding was the most expensive mistake they'll ever make. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from my mother. I showed Alexander the screen. Answer it, he said softly. Let's hear what she has to say now. I swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker. Amelia! My mother's voice was sharp with panic and barely contained fury. What have you done? The entire internet is talking about you marrying Alexander Cross. How could you embarrass the family like this? The words that would have devastated me just hours ago now bounced off me like raindrops. Hello, Mother? How was Sophia's cafe opening? Don't you dare try to turn this around. We're on our way to wherever you are right now. This situation needs to be managed before it gets completely out of hand. Alexander held out his hand for the phone, eyebrows raised in question. I nodded and passed it to him. Mrs. Chen, his voice was silk over steel. This is Alexander Cross, your daughter's husband. I'm afraid you're no longer invited to any events concerning my wife. The silence on the other end was deafening. Furthermore, Alexander continued conversationally, any attempts to contact Amelia through harassment, manipulation, or emotional blackmail will result in legal action. I protect what's mine. He hung up before she could respond. The power of it, the finality, the complete reversal of every dynamic that had governed my life, it was intoxicating. How does it feel? Alexander asked, slipping the phone back into my clutch. Like being reborn, I said, and realised it was literally true. As we prepared to leave for our reception, a celebration at the city's most exclusive hotel that Alexander had arranged while I was getting ready, I caught sight of myself in the vestry mirror. The woman looking back at me wore the same dress, the same makeup, but everything else had changed. Gone was the desperate daughter, begging for scraps of love. In her place stood Mrs. Alexander Cross, wife to the most powerful man in the city, protected and cherished and chosen first. The revenge had only just begun, and it was going to be spectacular. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom was a glittering wonderland of crystal chandeliers and champagne towers, transformed in less than 3 hours into the most exclusive wedding reception of the decade. Alexander's influence was terrifying in its efficiency. What should have taken months to plan had materialized in an afternoon, complete with a full orchestra, 5-star catering, and guest accommodations that made my original wedding reception look like a backyard barbecue. I stood beside my husband. The words still sent shivers down my spine, watching the city's elite mingle and celebrate our union. Senators chatted with tech moguls, socialites posed for pictures with entertainment executives, and everyone seemed determined to be seen at the cross wedding. My wedding. The wedding my family had deemed less important than a café ribbon cutting. "Penny for your thoughts, Mrs. Cross," Alexander murmured, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. Mrs. Cross. I was still getting used to the sound of it, the weight of carrying a name that could move mountains and topple governments. "I'm thinking about how different this is from what I originally planned," I said, watching a famous actress take selfies with the ice sculpture that had somehow appeared in the centre of the room. 6 months of planning versus 3 hours, and this is infinitely better. "That's because you were planning for the wrong life," Alexander said, his grey eyes intense as always. "You were trying to fit yourself into their story instead of writing your own." Before I could respond, a commotion near the ballroom entrance caught my attention. Security guards were speaking urgently into their earpieces, their posture suddenly alert. Through the crowd, I caught a glimpse of familiar faces pushing through the elegant throng like sharks through water. My family had arrived. "They actually came," I breathed, watching my parents and Sophia force their way past the security checkpoint. My mother looked furious, her face flushed red beneath her hastily applied makeup. My father wore his disappointed businessman expression, the one he usually reserved for failed investments. And Sophia? Sophia looked like she was about to combust with indignation. "Of course they did," Alexander said, his voice gaining that dangerous edge I was learning to recognize. "They couldn't let their daughter's marriage to a billionaire happen without trying to claim some credit." The security team approached us, their leader speaking quietly to Alexander. "Sir, there are 3 individuals claiming to be Mrs. Cross's family. They're not on the guest list, and they're becoming increasingly agitated." "Let them through," Alexander said calmly, "but keep them under close watch." I stared at him. "You want them here?" His smile was predatory. "Darling, revenge is best served in front of an audience, and we have the finest audience money can buy." The crowd seemed to sense the shift in energy, conversations dying as my family marched across the ballroom like they owned the place. Phones appeared as guests recognized the drama unfolding before them. This wasn't just a wedding reception anymore, it was theatre. "Emilia!" My mother's voice cut through the elegant atmosphere like a knife through silk. "What is the meaning of this spectacle?" The woman who'd given birth to me stood before me in her wrinkled dress, clearly thrown on in haste, her hair dishevelled from rushing across the city. Behind her, my father looked around the opulent ballroom with calculation in his eyes, probably estimating the cost of everything he saw. Sophia hung back slightly, her usual confidence shaken by the obvious wealth and power surrounding us. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice steady despite the familiar churning in my stomach. "I see, you finally found time in your schedule." "Don't you dare take that tone with me," she snapped, completely oblivious to the cameras recording every word. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The embarrassment you've caused? We had to hear about your wedding from strangers on the internet." "Maybe you should have attended the actual ceremony," Alexander said smoothly, stepping beside me like a shield. "You know, the one you were invited to, the one you skipped for a cafe opening." My father finally found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Mr. Cross, there's clearly been some misunderstanding. Our daughter is impulsive, young. She doesn't understand the implications of what she's done. The only misunderstanding, Alexander replied, his tone conversational but his eyes like ice, is your belief that you have any say in my wife's decisions. The word wife hit them like a physical blow. I watched my mother's face cycle through denial, shock, and finally, a calculating look I recognized all too well. Well, she said, her tone shifting to false sweetness. Of course we're happy for Amelia. We just wish we could have been part of the planning. As family, we could have helped make this even more special. The audacity was breathtaking. 20 minutes ago, she'd been screaming about embarrassment. Now, she was trying to insert herself into the narrative, to claim credit for a wedding she'd actively chosen to miss. How touching, Alexander said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Where was this family support when Amelia was planning her original wedding? When she called you 13 times in the past month asking for help with details? When she begged you to be there for the most important day of her life? The blood drained from my mother's face. She hadn't realized that Alexander knew about every rejected phone call, every ignored text, every broken promise. Sophia finally stepped forward, her face flushed with anger. This is ridiculous. You barely know him, Em. You can't just marry someone because you're mad at us. Mad at you, I repeated, genuine surprise in my voice. Sophia, I'm not mad at you. She blinked, confusion replacing anger. You're not... No, I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. I'm grateful to you. The ballroom had gone silent around us, every guest straining to hear this family drama unfold in real time. Grateful? My father sputtered. Absolutely. You see, if you'd shown up today, I might have gone through with marrying David. I might have settled for a safe, predictable life because I thought that's all I deserved. But you didn't show up. Again. And that finally taught me what I was worth. I gestured around the opulent ballroom, at the powerful people hanging on every word, at the husband beside me who'd moved heaven and earth to choose me. I'm worth this. I'm worth being someone's first choice, not their afterthought. I'm worth grand gestures and front-page news and a man who bought a building just to protect me. I paused, letting the words sink in. So, thank you. Thank you for showing me exactly what you think of me because it finally taught me to think better of myself. My mother's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Around us, guests were openly recording now, their phones capturing every moment of what would undoubtedly become viral content. But it was Alexander who delivered the killing blow. There's something else you should know, he said, his voice carrying easily through the silent ballroom. Amelia isn't just my wife, she's my business partner. I turned to stare at him, confusion flooding my system. What? His smile was tender now, all the sharp edges softened as he looked at me. Did you really think I'd marry someone without offering them the world? Congratulations, darling. You're now co-owner of Cross Enterprises. The words hit like a thunderbolt. Co-owner of a multi-billion-dollar empire. I was no longer just married to power, I was power. That's impossible, my father whispered, his face gone grey. You can't just... That's not how business works. Actually, Alexander said, producing a leather portfolio from seemingly nowhere, it's exactly how my business works. These are the transfer documents, signed this morning, 50% ownership, fully legal and binding. He handed me the portfolio, and I opened it with trembling hands. There it was, in black and white legal documents, transferring half of everything Alexander owned to me. The hotels, the tech companies, the real estate empire, the investment firms, all of it. Half of it was mine. Why? I breathed. Because, Alexander said, his voice soft but carrying to every corner of the room. You're not just someone I chose to marry. You're someone I chose to build an empire with, someone worthy of everything I can give." The revelation was stunning, but it was Sophia who voiced what everyone was thinking. "This is insane. You met her 2 months ago. People don't just... You don't give away half a fortune to someone you barely know." Alexander's laugh was rich and dark. "But that's where you're wrong, Miss Chen. I've known Amelia much longer than 2 months." Something cold slithered down my spine. "What do you mean?" He turned to face me fully, his grey eyes holding secrets I was suddenly afraid to learn. "I was there, Amelia, in your previous life. I was there when you died." The world tilted on its axis. The ballroom faded away until there was only Alexander's face, those storm grey eyes that had seen too much, known too much. "The nurse who held your hand as you took your last breath," he continued, his voice gentle but inexorable. "Maria Santos. She was my employee. I own the hospital where you died. I've been watching you, protecting you, falling in love with you for years. And when you died alone, I made a choice." My knees nearly buckled. "You're saying you... what? Brought me back?" "I'm saying I loved you enough to break the rules of reality itself. Death isn't as final as people think, not when you have enough power and enough love to rewrite the ending." His hands cupped my face tenderly. "I brought you back because the world needs you in it, because I need you in it." The silence in the ballroom was deafening. 300 of the city's most powerful people stood frozen, witnessing what sounded like a confession of literal magic. But looking into Alexander's eyes, seeing the truth burning there like starfire, I knew he wasn't lying. The impossible had happened because someone had loved me enough to make it happen. "You died for me," I whispered. "I would do it again," he said simply. "I would break every law of nature, challenge death itself, tear apart the fabric of reality, all for you." The weight of it was overwhelming. This wasn't just a marriage, wasn't just revenge against my family. This was a love story written across lifetimes, a romance so powerful it had literally conquered death. My family stood frozen in shock, finally understanding that they weren't just dealing with a billionaire who'd stolen their daughter. They were witnessing something beyond their comprehension, something that made their petty concerns about embarrassment and social standing seem laughably small. "So, you see," I said, turning back to them with newfound clarity, "this isn't about revenge. This isn't about proving a point or making you pay for your choices. This is about love, real love, the kind that moves mountains and stops time and brings people back from the dead." I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, with her social climbing aspirations, my father with his business calculations, my sister with her desperate need to be the centre of attention. "You missed my wedding because you thought Sophia's café was more important. But you didn't just miss a ceremony, you missed witnessing a miracle. You missed being part of a love story that will be told for generations. And that's not on me. That's on you." The truth of it settled over the ballroom like silence after thunder. This wasn't about a family who'd failed their daughter. This was about a daughter who transcended the need for their approval, who'd found something so much bigger and more beautiful than anything they could offer. "Congratulations," my mother said finally, her voice small and broken. Congratulations." It was the closest to an apology I'd ever get from her, and for the first time in 2 lifetimes, it was enough. As my family quietly retreated from the ballroom, defeated and diminished, Alexander pulled me close for a kiss that tasted like forever. "Ready for our real, happily ever after?" he whispered against my lips. "With you?" I smiled, feeling the weight of infinite possibilities stretching out before us. I'm ready for anything. Behind us, the orchestra began to play, and the most powerful people in the world applauded a love story that had literally conquered death itself. Some revenge stories end with destruction. This one ended with resurrection.